My name is Clarissa, and I'm 44 years old. I found out about my daughter's wedding from a stranger, not from her. I never thought I'd be the kind of mother who had to tell a story like this, but sometimes life writes scripts crueler than any movie ever could. It all started on a regular Thursday afternoon. I was leaving the grocery store when I ran into a neighbor I hadn't spoken to in weeks. She was smiling, carrying a bouquet of flowers. "Clarissa," she said brightly. "Congratulations. You must be so excited for Emily's big day." I blinked at her, confused. "Big day?" Her smile faltered. "The wedding," she said slowly. "Emily's wedding. Everyone's talking about it." My heart dropped. My daughter, my only child, was getting married. And this was how I found out? From a neighbor at the grocery store? I laughed nervously, hoping I had misunderstood. "Oh, there must be some mistake. Emily hasn't mentioned anything to me." But the neighbor looked even more awkward. "No, I'm sure. My niece is invited. The invitations went out weeks ago." Her words felt like knives. Invitations. Plural. Sent out weeks ago. To friends, to acquaintances, even to distant relatives, but not to me. Her mother. I went home with bags of groceries I couldn't even remember buying. My hands shook as I put them away. I stared at my phone, willing it to light up with a message from Emily that would explain everything. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe my invitation had gotten lost in the mail. But hours passed. Then days. And no message came. Finally, I dialed her number myself. She didn't answer. I left a voicemail, my voice breaking. "Emily, sweetheart, I heard something about a wedding. Please call me, please." Silence. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at a framed photo of Emily as a little girl. She was 5 years old, in pigtails, grinning proudly as she held up the finger-painted card she'd made for me. On Mother's Day, she used to say I was her best friend, her whole world. And now, I wasn't even worthy of an invitation to her wedding. I tried again the next day, and the next. Each call went unanswered. Each text sat unread. It felt like I was pounding on a locked door, begging to be let in, while my own daughter stood on the other side pretending I didn't exist. When I finally managed to reach her, the truth was worse than I could have imagined. She didn't just forget to invite me. She didn't want me there. I remember the coldness in her voice when she finally answered one evening, after weeks of silence. "Mom, I don't think it's a good idea for you to come." My chest tightened. "What do you mean, Emily? I'm your mother." She sighed, as though I were a burden. "It's my day, and I don't want drama. Aaron's family doesn't really approve of you. And honestly, I think it'll just be better if you don't come." Her words echoed in my ears long after she hung up. "Aaron's family doesn't approve of you. Since when did the approval of strangers outweigh the love of the woman who raised her?" That was the moment I knew. I had been banned from my own daughter's wedding. I sat in the dark that night, the phone still clutched in my hand, feeling like my heart had been ripped out of my chest. The pain wasn't just about the wedding, it was about everything I had given, everything I had sacrificed, everything I had endured to give Emily the life she deserved. And now, she was erasing me. And that's when I realized my own child had banned me from her wedding. She was my whole world, and I gave everything for her. When Emily told me I wasn't welcome at her wedding, I thought back to the day she was born. I was 20 when I held her for the first time, a scared young mother cradling a fragile little life in her arms. I remember whispering to her, promising that no matter what happened, I would always take care of her. Back then, it was just the two of us. Her father left before Emily was even out of diapers. He said he wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility. And then he vanished, leaving me with a baby, a pile of bills, and a heart that had to harden faster than it should have. From that moment on, Emily became my entire world. Every decision I made revolved around her. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, to keep a roof over our heads. By day, I worked in an office, typing reports until my fingers ached. By night, I picked up shifts at the diner, balancing trays and refilling coffee cups until dawn. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. But when I came home and saw Emily's tiny body curled up in bed, I knew it was worth it. There were nights when I skipped dinner so she could eat. Days when I wore shoes with holes in them because she needed new ones for school. Birthdays where I couldn't afford much, but I stayed up late the night before making decorations by hand, just so she would feel celebrated. I still remember one winter when the heater broke in our tiny apartment. The landlord dragged his feet fixing it, and the cold seeped into everything. I only had one heavy blanket, so I wrapped it around Emily and told her I wasn't cold. I sat awake all night, shivering in the dark, just to make sure she slept warmly. When Emily started school, I pushed myself even harder. I didn't want her to feel the absence of a father, or the lack of money. I wanted her to walk into that classroom with new pencils, shiny shoes, and the same confidence as any other child. I spent hours helping her with homework, cheering her on at school plays, clapping the loudest at every recital, and when she cried, I was there. Always. I was the shoulder she leaned on, the arms that held her, the voice that soothed her. The years rolled by in a blur of work and sacrifice, but I never complained, because to me, it wasn't a burden. It was love. I remember when she turned 16. Most kids her age begged for cars or fancy parties, but I couldn't afford that. Still, I worked extra hours, saved every spare dollar, and surprised her with a used car that was old but reliable. I'll never forget the look on her face. She squealed, hugged me, and said, "You're the best mom in the world." In that moment, every sleepless night, every skipped meal, every sacrifice felt worth it. When Emily decided to go to college, I was terrified about how we would pay for it. But I told her, "Don't you worry, we'll make it happen." I took out loans in my name, drained the little savings I had, and even sold some of the jewelry my grandmother left me. Watching Emily walk across that graduation stage, cap and gown swaying, tears streaming down my face, I thought, this is it. This is why I did it all. I didn't care that I was drowning in debt, or that my body ached from years of overwork. I had given her the chance at a future I never had. That's what motherhood meant to me. Sacrifice without expectation. I never asked Emily to repay me. I never asked her to give me anything except her love. But love is where everything started to unravel. Because as Emily grew older, she seemed to forget those sacrifices. She stopped saying thank you. She stopped looking at me like her hero and started looking at me like an inconvenience. I tried to remind myself that kids grow up, that they push boundaries, that they seek independence. I told myself that the distance between us was just part of her becoming her own person. But being banned from her wedding? That was more than independence. That was erasure. And that's what hurt the most. Not just that I wasn't invited. Not just that she chose Aaron's family's approval over mine. But that she forgot who had carried her. Who had raised her. Who had sacrificed everything to get her where she was. As I sat in my quiet house, staring at the old photographs lining the mantel, I whispered to myself, I gave you everything, Emily. How did I end up with nothing? But even the strongest sacrifices can be forgotten. I should have known something was wrong when she stopped answering my calls. Looking back now, I can trace the unraveling of our relationship like a thread slowly coming loose from a sweater. It didn't happen all at once. No, the distance between Emily and me grew quietly, almost invisibly, until one day it was too wide to cross. It started when she went off to college. I had always known that day would come. I was proud of her. Excited even. But I also felt the hollow ache of losing the little girl who used to cling to my hand. I drove her to campus myself. Tears in my eyes as we unloaded boxes into her dorm room. I hugged her tightly before leaving, whispering, "Call me every day, okay? Just to let me know you're safe." She smiled then, kissed my cheek, and said, "Of course, Mom. You know I will." And for the first few weeks, she did. She called almost daily, telling me about her classes, her professors, the new friends she was making. I listened eagerly, proud of every little detail. But then the calls started coming less often, from daily to every few days, then once a week. When I tried calling her, sometimes she didn't pick up. I told myself she was just busy, that she was adjusting to a new life. Still, Each missed call left me with a pang of worry. When she did answer, her tone was different. Shorter. Colder. Almost. One time I asked if she'd be coming home for a long weekend. She sighed and said, "Mom, I can't just come home all the time. I have a life here now." I laughed it off, but my chest tightened. She used to run into my arms after just one night at a friend's sleepover. And now a whole month could pass, and she didn't seem to miss me at all. Holidays were harder. She came home for Thanksgiving, but she spent most of the time texting on her phone. At Christmas, she stayed just long enough for dinner, then went back to campus to be with friends. I wrapped gifts with trembling hands, watching her open them with a polite smile but without the sparkle in her eyes I used to know. I brushed it aside, telling myself it was part of growing up. Kids pull away. They want independence. But there were moments that felt sharper. Moments that cut me in ways I couldn't ignore. Once, she called asking for money. Not unusual, I had always supported her. But when I gently asked why she needed so much, she snapped. "Do you have to question everything? Can't you just help me without making me feel guilty?" Her words stung. I wasn't trying to control her. I just wanted to understand. Still, I sent the money. I always did. Then there was the boyfriend phase. Emily started dating Aaron during her junior year, and I noticed a change immediately. Before him, even when she was distant, she still made time for me. But after Aaron entered the picture, it was as if I became invisible. Our phone calls dwindled to almost nothing. When she did pick up, she was distracted, her voice filled with irritation, as though talking to me was a chore. "I'm busy, Mom," she would say. "I'll call you later." But later never came. The first time she brought Aaron home, I tried to be welcoming. I cooked a nice dinner, set the table, even wore the dress she once said made me look pretty. But Aaron barely looked at me. He scrolled on his phone while I served the food. When I asked him questions, he answered in one-word replies. Emily laughed at his rudeness, brushing it off like it was nothing. After they left that night, I stood at the sink washing dishes, my hands trembling. Something in me whispered that this man was going to drive an even deeper wedge between us. I tried to talk to her about it later. I said gently, "Sweetheart, I don't think Aaron respects me. And I worry about how he treats you." She exploded. "Mom, why do you always have to criticize? You're so judgmental. You can't just let me be happy?" Her anger shocked me. I had only spoken from love, from concern. But in her eyes, I had become the enemy. From then on, it felt like she was looking for reasons to distance herself. She stopped coming home for holidays altogether. When I asked why, she'd say, "It's just easier to stay here." If I texted, she might respond hours later. Sometimes not at all. I kept telling myself, "This is temporary. She'll grow out of it. She'll come back to me." But deep down, I felt the truth gnawing at me. The little girl who once clung to me was gone. In her place was a woman I barely recognized, a woman who saw me not as her anchor, but as her obstacle. One night, after another ignored call, I sat alone on the couch staring at my phone. I scrolled through old photos of us birthday parties, school plays, Christmas mornings. In every picture, she was smiling at me like I was her whole world. And I whispered into the empty room, "When did I stop being enough for you?" But the cracks in our bond only grew deeper. The first time I met him, I knew he didn't like me. When Emily first mentioned Aaron, she spoke about him like he was the answer to every prayer. "He's so ambitious, Mom," she gushed over the phone. "He's smart, successful, and he makes me feel like I can do anything." Her voice was filled with excitement, and for a brief moment, I let myself hope. Maybe he would be good for her. Maybe he would bring out the best in her, the way a loving partner should. But deep down, something in her tone unsettled me. It wasn't just love I heard in her voice, it was admiration. And I knew how dangerous it could be when someone held that much power over another. The first time I met Aaron was at a dinner Emily invited me to. I dressed carefully that evening, wanting to make a good impression. I even baked Emily's favorite pie, thinking it might bring a sense of warmth to the occasion. When I arrived, Aaron greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His handshake was firm, almost too firm, as though he were trying to establish dominance right from the start. "Nice to finally meet you, Mrs. Carter," he said. "Please call me Clarissa," I replied warmly. He didn't. Throughout dinner, I tried to engage him in conversation. I asked about his job, his family, his hobbies. His answers were polite but clipped, like he was fulfilling an obligation. When I asked where he grew up, he smirked and said, "A little nicer than here, I'm sure." Emily laughed at his comment, but I felt the sting. He barely touched the pie I had baked, claiming he was watching his carbs. Instead, he scrolled on his phone while Emily and I tried to talk. Every time I asked Emily a question, he interrupted with a story about himself, his promotion, his investments, his travel plans. It was clear, he wasn't interested in me, and he wasn't interested in my daughter having a close relationship with me either. After dinner, when I helped Emily clear the table, I whispered, "Sweetheart, he doesn't seem very respectful." She bristled immediately. "Mom, don't start. You're always so critical. Aaron is amazing, and you're just not giving him a chance." Her defensiveness caught me off guard. I hadn't even raised my voice, hadn't accused, just observed. But the way she snapped told me everything. She was already choosing him over me. The second time I saw Aaron, the coldness was even more pronounced. We met at a small family barbecue, where my sister had invited them both. Aaron showed up in an expensive suit, completely overdressed for the occasion, as though he wanted everyone to know he was above them. When my brother-in-law offered him a beer, Aaron smirked. "I don't drink cheap stuff." The comment made the whole table uncomfortable. Emily giggled nervously, brushing it off as a joke, but I could see the disapproval in my relative's eyes. Later that evening, I overheard Aaron making a remark to Emily about my house. "You know, once we're married, you won't have to come to places like this anymore. We'll have something better." I froze where I stood. He wasn't just dismissing my home, he was dismissing me. That night, I confronted Emily gently. "Sweetheart, I don't think he respects our family. He talks down to us." Her face hardened. "You just don't understand him. He's ambitious. He wants more for us. Why can't you be happy for me?" I wanted to scream, because I see what you can't. Because I know what it looks like when someone is controlling you. But instead, I swallowed my words, not wanting to push her further away. The next time they invited me to dinner at their apartment, Aaron's disdain was impossible to ignore. When I complimented the decor, he smirked. "Yeah, well, Emily didn't really inherit much taste. I had to handle most of it." I looked at my daughter, waiting for her to defend herself, to defend us. She didn't. She just smiled and nodded, like his words were normal. Something inside me twisted. It wasn't just that Aaron didn't like me, it was that he was systematically teaching Emily not to like me either. Every dig, every dismissal, every subtle insult was pulling her further into his orbit, and it worked. Emily called me less. She visited almost never. When I did manage to see her, she was distant, her laughter forced, her patience thin. It was as if she was embarrassed by me. The final straw came one evening when I suggested we plan a weekend trip together, just the two of us. Something we used to love doing, hiking, shopping, just spending time together. She sighed and said, "Mom, I don't have time for that. Aaron and I are building a life together. You need to stop clinging to the past." Her words broke me. I wasn't clinging to the past. I was clinging to my daughter, but she was slipping away, and Aaron was holding the other end of the rope, pulling her farther and farther from me. From that moment on, I knew. He wasn't just a bad fit. He was a wedge. A wedge between Emily and me. A wedge that would only drive deeper until I was completely pushed out of her life. And soon, I realized he wanted me out of her life completely. She didn't just forget to invite me, she told me I wasn't welcome. After meeting Aaron a few more times, I tried convincing myself maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was just being too sensitive, too protective. I told myself if I gave him time, if I gave Emily space, things would improve. But the opposite happened. The more serious their relationship became, the further away Emily drifted from me. When she announced their engagement, I didn't even hear it from her. I found out through a mutual acquaintance who had seen the ring on her hand at a party. My phone remained silent, my daughter's voice absent. I remember staring at my screen that night, waiting for her to call, to tell me herself. She never did. Weeks passed before I mustered the courage to ask her directly. I called her one evening, my heart pounding as the phone rang. To my shock, she actually picked up. "Emily," I said softly. "I heard. You're engaged. Is it true?" There was a long pause on the other end, then she sighed. "Yes, Mom. I was going to tell you. Things have been busy. Busy. Too busy to tell her own mother about one of the biggest milestones of her life." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Well, congratulations. I'm happy for you, sweetheart. Have you set a date yet?" Another pause. "Yeah, we have. It's in June." I swallowed hard. June. Only a few months away. And she hadn't said a word to me until now. "Will you send me the details?" I asked gently. "So I can help out? Maybe with the dress shopping or the planning? I'd love to be part of it." The silence on the other end was deafening. When she finally spoke, her voice was sharp. "Mom, I don't think that's a good idea." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" She sighed heavily, like she was tired of me already. "Aaron and I have talked about it. We think it's better if you don't come to the wedding." The world tilted beneath me. "Don't come?" My voice cracked. "Emily, I'm your mother." "I know," she said quickly, almost defensively. "But Mom, you don't understand. This is our day. Aaron's family, they don't really approve of you. And honestly, you've always been so controlling. I don't want any drama on my wedding day." Her words sliced through me like glass. "Controlling?" I whispered. "Emily, everything I ever did, I did for you. I didn't ask you to." She snapped. "And I don't want you ruining my day with guilt trips or arguments. Aaron and I want a fresh start, without all of that." I gripped the phone, my hand trembling. "So you're saying I'm not welcome? At your wedding?" Her tone was cold, final. "Yes, Mom, that's what I'm saying." The call ended with a click, leaving me staring into the silence of my kitchen. The room spun around me, and I sank into a chair, the phone slipping from my hand. I replayed her words over and over. "You're not welcome. Aaron's family doesn't approve." Controlling. Drama. None of it felt real. How had I gone from being her everything to being treated like an obstacle? For days I wandered through the house like a ghost. Every photo of Emily mocked me: her graduation, her birthdays, the vacations we took when it was just the two of us against the world. I remembered the nights I skipped meals so she could eat, the years I worked double shifts so she could go to college. All of that erased with a single cruel sentence: "You're not welcome." When relatives called asking if I was excited for the big day, I could barely answer. "I won't be there," I admitted once, my voice breaking. The stunned silence on the other end was almost worse than the rejection itself. My sister tried to comfort me. "Maybe she'll come around," she said. "Maybe it's just stress talking." But I knew better. I heard the conviction in Emily's voice. She wasn't just excluding me, she was shutting me out of her life. The pain of it was indescribable. I had always pictured myself at her wedding, standing proudly as she walked down the aisle, tears in my eyes as I watched her start a new chapter. Instead, I would be sitting at home, erased from the story entirely. That night, I sat alone in my bedroom, clutching an old teddy bear Emily had carried everywhere as a child. I pressed it to my chest and sobbed until my body ached. "I was there for your first breath," I whispered into the darkness. "How can you deny me being there for this?" But the answer was already clear. She had chosen him. She had chosen his family, their approval, their judgment, over the woman who raised her. And that's when the grief turned into something else, something sharper, something that wouldn't let me stay silent forever. That was the day my daughter shut the door on me. I felt like I was mourning someone still alive. The days after Emily told me I wasn't welcome at her wedding blurred into one another. I woke up each morning with a heaviness in my chest, the kind that made it hard to even get out of bed. I wasn't just sad. I was grieving. Grieving a child who was still alive, but who had decided her life was better without me in it. I went through the motions. I cooked, I cleaned, I went to work. But everything felt hollow. When I walked through the grocery store, I caught myself reaching for Emily's favorite snacks before remembering she wouldn't be coming by. At night, I set the table for one, staring at the empty chair across from me as though she might suddenly appear. Sleep, and was the hardest. I'd close my eyes, and memories would flood in Emily as a baby. Emily's first day of school, Emily graduating in her cap and gown. Each memory was like a knife, reminding me of everything we'd shared and everything I was losing. I cried in the dark, clutching old photo albums to my chest. Sometimes I even whispered to her picture, "What did I do wrong? Why don't you want me anymore?" Friends tried to comfort me, but their words fell flat. One told me, "She's just young, she'll regret this one day." Another said, "Maybe it's just wedding stress, don't take it so personally." But how could I not take it personally? Weddings are about family. About love. And my only daughter had made it clear that I wasn't part of hers. I tried distracting myself with work. But even there, the pain followed me. A coworker excitedly talked about helping her daughter pick out a wedding dress, and I excused myself to the bathroom, locking the stall door before sobbing quietly into my hands. At church, when the pastor spoke about forgiveness and family, I felt my throat tighten. "Families," he said, "are a reflection of God's love, unconditional, eternal." I wanted to scream. What about when family turns their back on you? What about when love becomes conditional on someone else's approval? Even little things became unbearable. I'd see commercials with brides twirling in white gowns and feel my stomach twist. I'd pass bridal shops and have to look away. Everywhere I went, there were reminders of the milestone I was being robbed of. My sister checked in often, bringing me meals, sitting with me as I poured my heart out. "Clarissa," she said one evening, holding my hand. "You've given Emily everything. You can't blame yourself for this. She's making her choices." I nodded. But inside I felt consumed by guilt. Was I too strict when she was a teenager? Did I work too much when she was little? Did I smother her with too much love? Or not give her enough freedom? Every possible mistake replayed in my mind like a cruel highlight reel. But alongside the guilt, anger began to build. Not hot, screaming anger, but a slow, simmering burn. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how unfair it was. I had been there for Emily through everything. I had carried the weight of single motherhood, sacrificed my dreams, given her every chance at success. And now she was acting like I was the embarrassment, the burden. The heartbreak was unbearable, but the injustice was what kept me awake at night. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by bills and bank statements. My eyes landed on a loan I had taken out years ago to pay for Emily's tuition. The balance was still there, my name still tied to it. My chest tightened as I realized the cruel irony. I was still paying for the life she was building, one that no longer included me. The grief began to shift that night. It wasn't just about losing my daughter. It was about realizing how much I had given and how little I had been valued in return. For weeks, I swung between heartbreak and fury. Some days, I cried until my body ached. Other days, I walked through the house in silence, a steel resolve forming in my chest. I had always believed love meant sacrifice, that a mother's role was to give without expectation. But now, staring at the empty chair at my table, I wondered if that belief had been my downfall. Had I taught Emily that my love came so cheaply, she could throw it away without consequence? One night, unable to sleep, I sat in the dark with a cup of tea, staring out the window at the quiet street. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, and for the first time, I saw not just a grieving mother, but a woman who deserved better. The grief was still there, heavy, raw, unrelenting, but beneath it, something else stirred. A question. A whisper. What if I stopped letting them write me out of the story? But grief has a way of hardening into something else. I decided if she didn't want me as her mother, I'd stop playing the role she expected. For weeks, I lived like a ghost in my own house. I wandered through the rooms aimlessly, replaying every moment of Emily's childhood, every sacrifice I had made, every word she had thrown at me. Her rejection clung to me like a weight I couldn't shake. But grief is a strange thing. It can break you, yes, but sometimes, when the tears finally dry, it leaves something behind, something harder, sharper. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table with bills spread out before me, my eyes landed again on the loan statement for Emily's college tuition. My signature was still at the bottom, my name still tied to the debt. I had taken it out for her future, believing she would use it to build a life that included me. Now, she was building that life without me, while I remained shackled to the burden. A bitterness rose in my throat. For years, I had sacrificed everything: money, time, health without complaint. But now, I began to see it differently. I wasn't just a grieving mother. I was a woman who had been used. I started combing through old papers, bank statements, receipts, records of everything I had given Emily over the years. Tuition payments, car repairs, apartment deposits, thousands and thousands of dollars poured into her life, all from me. She hadn't built her world alone, she had built it on my back, and now she was acting as though I was disposable. The more I stared at those papers, the angrier I became. How could she erase me so easily when every brick of her foundation was laid with my sacrifice? That's when the thought hit me. If she didn't want me at her wedding, fine. But she didn't get to banish me and still benefit from everything I had worked for. For years, I had accepted my role as the giver, the sacrificer, the one who put herself last. But now I wanted to take back control. The next morning, I picked up the phone and called a lawyer. I had never done anything like that before. I had never needed to. I trusted my daughter. I trusted love. But love had failed me, and trust had been broken. All I had left was the truth, and the truth was written in black ink across every document in my files. The lawyer's secretary scheduled an appointment, and when I hung up, my hands were shaking. It felt wrong, almost sinful, to think of taking legal steps against my own daughter. But then I remembered her words. "You're not welcome. Aaron's family doesn't approve. You're too controlling." I had been erased, and if she could erase me from her life, I could erase her from my plans. That night, I sat in bed with the folder of papers on my lap. It felt heavy, like it carried not just documents but decades of my life. I thought about Emily as a little girl, about how much I loved her, about how I still loved her even now. And then I thought about how love without respect is nothing but chains. I whispered into the darkness. If she doesn't respect me as her mother, then I won't play the role she expects. The next day, I met with the lawyer. His office smelled faintly of leather and coffee, lined with shelves of thick law books. He shook my hand firmly, invited me to sit, and asked me to explain. At first, the words caught in my throat. It felt unnatural to say them aloud. That my daughter had banned me from her wedding. That she had chosen her fiancé's approval over my love. But once I started talking, the dam broke. I told him everything, the sacrifices, the rejection, the humiliation. When I slid the folder across his desk, he opened it and began flipping through the papers. He raised his eyebrows. "You've kept excellent records," he said. "Most people don't have this much documentation." I almost laughed. Of course I had records. When you spend your whole life budgeting every penny, you save every receipt, every statement. It had been survival then. You know, Mrs. Carter, you have more leverage than you realize. Financially, legally, you're not powerless here. His words sent a shiver through me. For so long I had felt powerless, like my entire worth depended on whether Emily accepted me. But here was a man telling me I still had agency. That I could still shape the future. I walked out of that office with a new feeling burning in my chest, not just grief, not just anger, but determination. I wasn't going to beg for a place at Emily's wedding anymore. I wasn't going to sit at home, mourning like a widow for a daughter who had turned her back on me. If she didn't want me in her life, then she wouldn't get to profit from mine. For the first time since Emily had uttered those cruel words, I felt steady on my feet. I had a plan. I had options. And deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. And that's when a plan began to take shape. He told me I had more power than I realized. When I first walked into Mr. Dalton's office, I expected to feel small. I expected to be reminded that I was just a grieving, middle-aged woman whose daughter no longer wanted her. But instead, I walked out feeling taller, stronger, as though the years of sacrifice had finally given me something back. Mr. Dalton was calm, with the kind of steady presence that made you feel like you could hand him all your troubles, and he'd sort them neatly into piles. He sat behind a polished oak desk, glasses perched on his nose, his expression unreadable as I poured out my story. I told him about Emily, how I raised her alone, how I worked 3 jobs at once to keep food on the table, how I sacrificed every piece of myself so she could succeed. And then I told him about the rejection, about her banning me from the wedding because Aaron's family didn't approve. The words tasted bitter, but I forced them out. I wanted him to understand the weight of what I carried. When I finished, I slid the folder of documents across his desk. Receipts, loan statements, proof of tuition payments, rent deposits. Even the used car I had bought Emily for her 16th birthday. Every sacrifice had a paper trail. He studied them silently for a while, flipping through the pages. The only sound in the room was the quiet rustle of paper and the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Finally, he looked up, his gaze sharp. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "you've given this girl everything." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "And she's thrown me away." He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Maybe she thinks she can. But legally, financially, she can't erase you. You have more power here than you realize." His words sent a chill down my spine. "What do you mean?" He pointed to the papers. "You're the co-signer on her student loans. That means if she defaults, it all falls back on you. You've provided substantial financial support, things that could be considered loans, even if you never called them that. And as for your estate..." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "If you haven't already updated your will, then she likely assumes she stands to inherit everything." I clenched my hands in my lap. Of course she assumed that. I had always told myself everything I worked for would one day go to her. It was the unspoken promise of motherhood. You sacrifice, they inherit. Mr. Dalton leaned forward. "Here's the truth, Clarissa. You don't owe her anything. Not anymore. If she wants to cut you out of her life, then she has no claim to what you leave behind. You have every right to change your will, to protect your assets, to decide who is worthy of inheriting the life you built." I sat in stunned silence, my mind racing. For so long I had felt powerless, like Emily held all the cards because she had the power to reject me. But sitting there in that office, I realized I wasn't powerless at all. I had something she wanted, something she took for granted. I couldn't cut her out completely, I whispered, half to myself. "She's my daughter." Mr. Dalton nodded slowly. "I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you what you can do. You have the right to set conditions. You can decide that she only benefits if she treats you with respect. You can leave her nothing at all. Or you can direct your estate elsewhere, to charities, to relatives, to anyone you choose. That's the power you hold." The power I hold. The words echoed in my mind like a revelation. For decades, I had believed my role was only to give, to pour myself out until I was empty, trusting that Emily would one day refill me with love and gratitude. But now, faced with the truth, I saw that I wasn't empty. I was holding something valuable. Something she expected, something she felt entitled to. Mr. Dalton slid a blank notepad toward me. "Start thinking about what matters to you. Who matters, where you want your legacy to go. We'll draft the paperwork when you're ready." I picked up the pen, my hand trembling slightly. For the first time in years, I wasn't writing another check for Emily, or signing another loan in her name. I was writing for me. That night, I went home and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the notepad. My house was quiet, the kind of silence that used to crush me. But this time, it felt different. I began to make a list. Charities that had helped me when I was a struggling single mom. My sister, who had stood by me through everything. My goddaughter, who always treated me like family. People and causes that actually valued me. And then, at the bottom, I wrote Emily's name. Next to it, I wrote one word: respect. If she ever chose to come back, if she ever chose to rebuild the bridge she had burned, then maybe she could still be part of my legacy. But if not, then she would get nothing. By the time I set the pen down, my grief had shifted into resolve. Emily may have cut me out of her wedding, but I was about to cut her out of something far more permanent. If they wanted to erase me, I'd erase their entitlement. Every signature I made was like reclaiming a piece of myself. The week after my meeting with Mr. Dalton, I lived with a sense of restless energy. It wasn't grief anymore, it wasn't even anger, it was purpose. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I was doing something for myself, not just giving everything away for someone else's benefit. The folder of documents had never left my kitchen table. Every evening I sat with it, reviewing every loan statement, every tuition bill, every receipt for Emily's car repairs and apartment deposits. What had once been quiet evidence of my sacrifices now looked like ammunition. When Mr. Dalton called to say the drafts were ready, my heart thudded in my chest. I knew this was the point of no return. Once the papers were signed, Emily's assumptions would crumble. She would no longer be the heir to everything I had bled for. I drove to his office in silence, my mind replaying the last phone call I'd had with Emily. "You're not welcome. Aaron's family doesn't approve." Her voice was cold, dismissive, almost rehearsed. She had sounded more like him than like my daughter. Mr. Dalton welcomed me with his usual calm professionalism. He slid a thick stack of papers across the desk. "This is everything we discussed. Updated will, trust arrangements, instructions for the executor." I stared at the stack, my hand trembling slightly. My name was printed at the top of each page, bold and official. For so long I had felt erased. But here was proof of my power in black ink. He walked me through it carefully. The house would go to my sister, who had stood by me through every storm. My savings would be divided between charities that helped struggling single mothers and a scholarship fund for young women pursuing education. A small portion would go to my goddaughter, who had never treated me like an afterthought. And then came Emily. Her section was short. One line: "Emily Carter shall inherit nothing unless she chooses to reconcile with me," showing consistent respect and rebuilding a genuine relationship during my lifetime. No money, no assets, no automatic entitlement. The door wasn't fully closed, but it was no longer wide open. She would have to walk through it herself, on my terms. When Mr. Dalton finished reading, he looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "Are you ready for this, Clarissa?" I swallowed hard. Could any mother ever truly be ready to put her child's name in writing under conditions like these? But then I thought of every sacrifice I had made, every night I'd gone hungry so she could eat, every double shift I'd worked so she could go to college. And I thought of how easily she had erased me from her life, how quickly she had chosen Aaron's family over her own mother. I picked up the pen. With each signature, I felt something shift inside me. The grief that had weighed me down for weeks seemed to lighten. The shame that had gnawed at me since Emily banned me from her wedding loosened its grip. Each line of ink was a reminder. I still had power. By the time I signed the last page, my hand was steady, my heart calmer than it had been in months. Mr. Dalton gathered the papers neatly, tapping them into a stack. "It's done," he said simply. Those two words carried more weight than I could describe. I left his office and stepped into the sunlight. For the first time in what felt like forever, the air felt crisp in my lungs. The world looked clearer. I wasn't the powerless mother begging for scraps of affection. I was a woman who had taken back control of her life and her legacy. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the porch, the notary's seal still fresh on the documents I'd brought home. I watched the sun dip below the horizon, the sky painted in streaks of orange and pink, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to smile. Emily and Aaron probably thought they had won that by banning me from the wedding. They had silenced me, diminished me. But what they didn't realize was that the real ceremony wasn't theirs. It was mine. My ceremony of reclaiming my voice, my dignity, my worth. I didn't need to stand in the church watching her walk down the aisle to prove I was her mother. I didn't need to wear a dress or sit in the front pew or plaster on a fake smile while being judged by people who didn't even know me. What I needed was to protect myself, and I had done it. Every signature was a boundary I should have drawn years ago. Every clause was a reminder that love should never mean surrendering yourself entirely. Every line was proof that I was finally choosing me. The grief was still there, yes, but it had transformed. It wasn't a crushing weight anymore. It was a scar. A reminder of what I had endured and what I had survived. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The wedding was coming soon, and while I wouldn't be there in person, I had already decided they wouldn't forget me. Not on that day, not ever. And those papers would one day speak louder than my presence. While they celebrated, I prepared my own ceremony of truth. The morning of Emily's wedding arrived like a storm cloud. For weeks, I had dreaded it, knowing I would not be there to see her walk down the aisle. No proud mother's smile, no tears of joy, no photograph of us standing together as the next chapter of her life began. Instead, I sat in my quiet kitchen, a cup of coffee cooling in my hands, staring at the calendar. June 12th, the date I would never forget. At first, I had planned to lock myself away, to hide from the world until the day was over, but the folder of documents on my kitchen table reminded me that I was no longer the powerless woman she thought she had cast aside. I had already signed away her entitlement, already redrawn the lines of our relationship. Now it was time for the final act. I put on a simple black dress, not a gown, not a celebration outfit, just something that made me feel strong. I gathered the envelope Mr. Dalton had prepared, sealed neatly with the notary's stamp. Inside were the updated will, the trust instructions, and a letter I had written in my own hand. The letter wasn't long, but it was sharp. Emily, you made it clear I wasn't welcome at your wedding, and so, I respected that. But understand this. If you can erase me from your day, I can erase you from my future. These papers speak louder than I ever could. They will not be undone with apologies, whispered too late. Mom, I slipped the envelope into my bag and drove to Mr. Dalton's office, where he was already waiting. He looked at me with quiet understanding as I handed it over. Are you certain? He asked gently. Yes, I said firmly. If she wanted me gone, then she can't have it both ways. She doesn't get to cut me out of her life and still expect to inherit mine. He nodded, tucking the envelope into his briefcase. Then I'll deliver it. And with that, I let go of the last illusion that I was powerless. While Emily and Aaron were standing at the altar, saying their vows, I was sitting at home with a cup of tea, watching the sunlight stream through my window. It was strangely peaceful, knowing I had no part in their day but still held a presence that would not be ignored. Hours later, as guests filled the reception hall, Mr. Dalton entered quietly. He didn't make a scene. He didn't shout. He simply approached the head table, placed the sealed envelope in front of Emily and Aaron, and said in his calm, steady voice, "This is from your mother." I wasn't there, but later I would hear from relatives exactly what happened next. Emily frowned as she tore the envelope open, expecting perhaps a sentimental letter, maybe even an olive branch of reconciliation. But as her eyes scanned the pages, her face drained of color. Aaron leaned over her shoulder, his jaw tightening as he read. Whispers began to ripple through the tables as they realized something was wrong. Emily's hands shook, the paper crumpling under her grip. She slammed it down on the table, her voice rising. She can't do this. But she was wrong. I could. And I had. Aaron stood, his face red with anger, demanding to know how this had happened, what it meant. Mr. Dalton remained calm, his voice carrying just enough for the nearby guests to hear. It means that your mother has chosen to protect herself. Her estate is no longer promised to you. She has every legal right to decide where her legacy goes. The room fell into stunned silence. The perfect fairy tale they had tried to stage cracked like glass under pressure. Some guests whispered in shock, others shook their heads, pity in their eyes. A few, I was told, even muttered words of support for me because deep down, they understood. They had watched me raise Emily alone, watched me sacrifice everything, and now they saw the truth. I wasn't going to be humiliated quietly. Emily, red-faced and furious, stormed away from the table, dragging Aaron with her. They argued loudly in the corner, their perfect wedding now stained with chaos. Meanwhile, Mr. Dalton simply left the hall, his duty complete. And me? I sat at home, pouring myself another glass of wine, staring out the window at the peaceful evening sky. I didn't need to be there to know the effect. I didn't need to see her face to know my message had landed. She had tried to erase me, but on the very day she thought she could shine without me, I reminded her that I was still part of her story. Not as the quiet, forgotten mother she wanted hidden away, but as the woman who refused to be silenced. It wasn't about revenge, it wasn't about ruining her day, it was about balance. If she could choose to cut me out, then I could choose to do the same. If she thought my absence would make me invisible, she was wrong. That night, as I crawled into bed, I whispered to myself, I didn't need to walk her down the aisle. I didn't need to sit in the pews. I made my presence known in a way they'll never forget. And that was the moment their fairy tale began to crack. The lawyer read aloud the words I could never have said without breaking. I wasn't there to see it, like myself, but the accounts came back to me in pieces from relatives, from neighbors, even from a few guests who reached out privately afterward. They all told me the same thing. The moment my lawyer delivered that envelope, the room changed. Emily and Aaron had crafted the perfect picture. The reception hall glittered with chandeliers, white roses cascaded across the tables, and guests sipped champagne while laughing politely. To anyone watching, it was a fairy tale. But when Mr. Dalton calmly walked to the head table, briefcase in hand, the illusion shattered. He didn't make a scene, that wasn't his way. He simply bowed his head slightly to Emily, placed the sealed envelope before her, and said, "From your mother." At first, Emily looked almost relieved, as though she thought it might be an apology, a peace offering, maybe even a sentimental note wishing her happiness despite my absence. But the relief lasted only seconds. As she tore open the envelope and read the first page, her smile froze. Then it crumbled. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the documents, her lips parting in disbelief. Aaron leaned over, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the text. His face went from smug amusement to barely contained rage. Whispers began spreading through the tables. "What's that? What's going on? Is everything okay?" Then, in a voice that carried further than she intended, Emily cried out, "She can't do this to me!" The room went dead silent. Every fork paused midair. Every head turned. Dalton, composed as ever, remained standing at her side. He didn't raise his voice, but his words were clear enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Your mother has chosen to exercise her legal rights. Her assets, her estate, her legacy, all have been redirected, with conditions. You are no longer the sole heir." A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Emily's face burned red as she shot up from her chair. "This is supposed to be my wedding day, not hers," she shouted, the papers crumpling in her fist. "She's trying to ruin everything." Aaron stood beside her, his jaw clenched, glaring at Mr. Dalton. "Tell everyone this is a mistake," he demanded. "Tell them it's not valid." Dalton simply adjusted his glasses and replied evenly, "It is valid. Notarized. Filed. And it cannot be undone without your mother's consent." The words landed like a hammer. Guests began whispering furiously, unable to contain their curiosity. Some looked at Emily with pity, others with judgment. They had seen me raise her alone, seen me struggle and sacrifice, and now they were watching her try to erase me. But the papers made one thing clear: I wasn't erased. My sister later told me she overheard someone at her table mutter, "Good for Clarissa. She deserved better." Meanwhile, Emily's composure crumbled. Tears streaked her makeup, her voice breaking as she screamed, "She doesn't love me. This is just revenge." But Mr. Dalton calmly set down one final piece of paper on the table, the letter I had written in my own hand. "Emily, you made it clear I wasn't welcome at your wedding. And so, I respected that. But understand this. If you can erase me from your day, I can erase you from my future. These papers speak louder than I ever could. They will not be undone with apologies," whispered too late. Mom Emily read it aloud without realizing it, her voice shaking, carrying through the microphone that had been left on at the head table. Every guest in the hall heard my words. Every guest heard my truth. Gasps filled the room. Murmurs rose again, louder this time, buzzing like a swarm. And there, in front of everyone she had hoped to impress Aaron's family, his colleagues, her friends, Emily broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. Aaron tried to gather her, to usher her away from the stares and whispers, but the damage was done. The perfect wedding had become a spectacle. Later, my sister told me she had locked eyes with Aaron's mother across the room. The woman's lips were pressed in a thin line, her eyes cold. She wasn't looking at me, of course I wasn't there. But in that moment, she realized her son's bride wasn't bringing with her the kind of family wealth and inheritance they had assumed. The whispers spread quickly. So Clarissa left her nothing? Not even the house? Did you hear she gave it all to charity? The truth had taken root, and there was no silencing it. By the time Miss Dalton left the hall, briefcase in hand, Emily and Aaron were gone, hiding in some back room, trying to salvage their pride. Guests awkwardly pushed food around their plates, uncertain whether to stay or leave. The fairy tale had shattered, and the shards were sharp enough to cut everyone who had believed in it. And me? I sat at home in the quiet, a candle flickering on my kitchen table, sipping tea. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cruel. I felt resolved. I hadn't spoken a word at the wedding. I hadn't needed to. My lawyer and my papers had done it for me. They had carried the truth into a room where I wasn't welcome and placed it squarely in front of my daughter. She thought banning me would silence me. But she was wrong. I wasn't there in person, but my truth echoed louder than their vows. They tried to make me the villain, but the papers told another story. The day after the wedding, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Missed calls, angry voicemails, text messages that read like daggers on a screen. Emily, Aaron, even some of their friends and his family, all of them unleashing their fury at me. The first voicemail came from Emily, her voice thick with tears and rage. "How could you do this to me, Mom? You humiliated me in front of everyone. You ruined the happiest day of my life." I sat at the kitchen table, the phone pressed to my ear, listening to her words, my heart aching. She sounded like a child throwing a tantrum, except this was no tantrum. This was years of resentment spilling over. Another message came from Aaron, colder, sharper. "You think you're clever, don't you? You think you can control us from the grave? Well, guess what? You're not getting rid of me that easily. I'll fight this. I'll take you to court if I have to." I almost laughed at the arrogance. He thought threats could scare me back into silence. But I had already consulted with Mr. Dalton. Everything was airtight. He had no ground to stand on. The calls from relatives, though that was harder. Some supported me quietly. "Clarissa, you did what you had to do," one cousin said gently. "Don't let them guilt you." But others weren't so kind. My aunt left a message dripping with judgment. "How could you air dirty laundry like that? At a wedding? Shame on you. A mother should rise above." I wanted to scream at her. Rise above? I had risen above for decades. I had sacrificed, endured, kept quiet through disrespect and neglect. And where had it gotten me? Uninvited to my own daughter's wedding. The community itself seemed split. At the grocery store, People avoided eye contact, pretending not to recognize me. But a few approached quietly. One older woman touched my arm and whispered, "I wish I'd had your courage when my son married his wife. Maybe things would have turned out differently." Still, the backlash weighed heavily. Emily posted online about me long, venomous posts painting me as controlling, manipulative, vindictive. She wrote about how I had ruined her wedding day out of jealousy and how I had always made her feel like she owed me her life. Reading her words, I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. I had given her everything, and now the world was being told I had given her chains. The comments poured in, some siding with her, others skeptical. "There are two sides to every story," one person wrote. "Sounds like the mom had her reasons." But the hate still stung. Words like selfish, bitter, toxic clung to me even though I knew they weren't true. One night, after a particularly vicious round of messages, I sat on my bed holding the teddy bear Emily had loved as a child. My tears soaked into its worn fur as I whispered, "How did we get here, sweetheart? How did love turn into this?" But then I remembered, the papers, the will, the conditions. For the first time, I had drawn a boundary. For the first time, the backlash wasn't proof I was wrong. It was proof I had finally stood up for myself. Aaron's threats never materialized into action. Mr. Dalton reassured me. "He's bluffing. They don't have a case. You have every legal right to distribute your estate however you see fit." Emily, though, was relentless. She called at odd hours, sometimes sobbing, sometimes screaming. "You're supposed to love me unconditionally," she yelled once, her voice breaking. And that was the crux of it, wasn't it? She believed unconditional love meant unconditional forgiveness, unconditional access. That no matter how she treated me, I would still hand over my life's work with a smile. But I had learned the hard way that unconditional love doesn't mean being a doormat. I didn't hate her. God, no. She was my child, my only daughter, and I would always love her in some way. But love without respect is not love, it's servitude. And I was done serving. The more backlash I received, the stronger my resolve became. Every angry voicemail, every cruel post, every judgmental whisper reminded me why I had done what I did. I wasn't the villain of this story. I was the survivor of it. One evening, I called my sister, my voice shaking. "Am I wrong? Am I really the monster they say I am?" She was quiet for a moment, then said firmly, "Clarissa, you are not a monster. You are a mother who has been pushed past her breaking point. You gave Emily everything, and she gave you nothing but rejection. Don't let anyone twist that." Her words steadied me. I began focusing less on the backlash and more on the quiet victories. I slept better at night knowing Aaron's family couldn't use me as a stepping stone. I felt lighter, knowing my legacy would go to people and causes that truly mattered to me. And I felt stronger knowing I had finally spoken without fear. Yes, they could rage. Yes, they could call me names. Yes, they could twist the story to make themselves look like victims. But deep down, I knew the truth. And the truth was this: they hadn't expected me to fight back. They thought they had silenced me for good. But instead, I had reminded them and everyone else that I was still here, still strong, still capable of making choices that mattered. And though they hated me for it, they could never undo it. For the first time, I wasn't just Emily's mother. I was Clarissa. After the storm of Emily's wedding and the backlash that followed, my life settled into something strangely quiet. For years, I had defined myself by her needs, her dreams, her happiness. Every choice I made was through the lens of motherhood. But now, with Emily pushing me out and the papers signed, I found myself staring into a mirror and seeing someone I barely recognized. Who was I, if not her mother? That question haunted me at first. But slowly, it began to transform. Instead of mourning what I had lost, I started wondering what I might gain. The first step was my home. For weeks, I had avoided Emily's old bedroom, unable to face the memories it held. One Saturday morning, I opened the door and forced myself inside. Her posters still clung to the walls, her books were stacked on the shelf, her high school trophies lined the dresser. It was like walking into a museum of the past. I sat on the bed and cried for a long time, mourning not just the daughter I'd lost but the years I had given so completely. Then, with a deep breath, I began boxing things up. Not throwing them away, just putting them in storage. The room needed to stop being a shrine and start being useful again. By evening, it was empty. The next week, I painted the walls a soft blue and turned it into a craft room. It was symbolic, in a way. I was taking back space that had been frozen in time, reclaiming it for myself. The next step was my work. For years, I had put my career on the back burner, picking up whatever jobs fit around Emily's schedule. But now, I wanted more. I dusted off my resume, updated my skills, and applied for a position at a local nonprofit that supported single mothers. When I sat in the interview, nervous and hopeful, the director asked me why I wanted the job. I told her the truth, because I know what it's like. I know what it feels like to choose between paying the light bill and buying your child new shoes. I know what it feels like to love so deeply you'll break yourself in half just to keep them whole. Her eyes softened. A week later, I got the job. Working at the nonprofit gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Helping other women who were walking the path I once walked reminded me of my own strength. It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about thriving. I also began to nurture friendships I had long neglected. Over the years, I had pulled away from social circles, too exhausted or too broke to join in. But now, when friends invited me for coffee or book club, I said yes. We laughed, we shared stories, we supported each other. I discovered that my world could be filled with love even if it didn't come from Emily. Self-care became another piece of the puzzle. I signed up for a yoga class, shaky and self-conscious at first, but soon finding peace in the slow movements and deep breaths. I picked up painting again, splattering canvases with colors that reflected my emotions, sometimes dark, sometimes bright, always honest. And perhaps most importantly, I started traveling. Not far at first, just day trips to nearby towns, little weekend getaways. For so long, I had dreamed of seeing the world but told myself I couldn't because Emily needed me. Now, with no one holding me back, I booked a trip to Italy. Standing in Rome, gazing up at the Colosseum, eating gelato on cobblestone streets, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Joy. Pure, unfiltered joy that wasn't tied to anyone else's happiness. Of course, Emily still lingered in my thoughts. Some nights, I lay awake wondering if she was happy, if she regretted what she had done, if Aaron was treating her kindly. I still loved her, even if I didn't like the choices she made. But I learned to hold that love without letting it consume me. For so long, I had thought being a mother meant giving everything away. But now I realized motherhood was only one part of who I was. I was also Clarissa, strong, capable, creative, independent. One evening, I hosted a small dinner at my home for a few close friends. We sat around the table, candles flickering, laughter filling the air. As I poured wine and listened to the conversation, I realized I wasn't lonely anymore. My life wasn't empty. It was different, yes, but it was mine. I no longer defined myself by Emily's approval. I no longer lived in fear of her rejection. I had reclaimed my life, piece by piece, day by day. And as I stood in my kitchen washing dishes after everyone left, I caught my reflection in the window. For the first time in years, I didn't see a grieving mother. I saw a woman reborn. And in losing my daughter, I found myself again. Blood makes us related, but respect makes us family. It's been months since the day of Emily's wedding. Months since the lawyer carried my words into the reception hall and shattered the illusion of perfection she and Aaron tried to build. Months since the furious calls and hateful messages, the whispers and the backlash. In that time, I've had space to breathe, to think, to decide what comes next. I still love my daughter. I don't think a mother ever truly stops loving her child. But love, I've learned, does not mean surrender. It does not mean allowing yourself to be treated like a doormat. Love without respect isn't love at all, it's a leash. For so long, I believed motherhood meant giving until there was nothing left. I told myself Emily's happiness mattered more than mine, that every sacrifice was worth it. But what happens when your child takes and then throws you away? What happens when the person you gave your whole life to decides you're not worthy of standing by her side on her most important day? I'll tell you what happens. You break, you grieve, you shatter. But then, if you're strong enough, you rebuild. I'm not naive. I know Emily and Aaron paint me as the villain in their story. Maybe they always will. But villains don't sacrifice meals so their child can eat. Villains don't work double shifts to pay for college. Villains don't sit in the dark, praying their daughter finds love and happiness. No. I am not a villain. If Emily ever comes to me with sincerity, with respect, with a willingness to rebuild what she destroyed, I won't turn her away. My heart will always have space for her. But I won't beg anymore. I won't chase her down, knocking on locked doors, bleeding for scraps of affection. Because the truth is, family is not just blood. Family is choice. Family is respect. Family is the people who show up, who value you, who don't erase you when it's inconvenient. And in that definition of family, I am not alone. I have my sister, who stood beside me when everyone else judged. I have friends who fill my home with laughter, who remind me that life can be joyful. I have the women at the nonprofit I now work with, who look at me with gratitude and admiration because they know I've walked their path. I have a community that, even if divided, knows I refuse to stay silent. That is family, that is legacy. When I think about my will now, about the scholarships and charities and godchildren who will benefit, I don't feel bitterness, I feel peace. My legacy will go where it is valued. It will not be squandered by people who see me as a burden. It will build futures, lift others, honor the sacrifices I made. Emily may see this as punishment, but it isn't. It's a boundary, a statement, a truth. I don't hate her, I never could. But I love myself too. And finally, after all these years, I am learning to choose me. Sometimes, late at night, I still whisper to the photo of her as a little girl, the one with the pigtails and the paint-smeared hands. I tell her, I hope you're happy, my darling. I hope one day you understand why I did what I did. And I hope, if you ever come back, you come back not as someone entitled to my life, but as someone willing to walk beside me with respect. Until then, I will live. Fully. Proudly. Unapologetically, because I am not just Emily's mother, I am Clarissa, a woman who gave everything, who was cast aside, who found the strength to stand up and say, enough. Because in the end, my lawyer spoke the words my heart could, not, I deserve better.